Some murders are solved in a matter of days. A suspect is identified, an arrest is made, and the legal system takes its course. Others, however, fade quietly into history, becoming cold case files stored away in archives. And then there are cases like this one, killing so carefully concealed, so deeply baffling, that even years later, no one can say with absolute certainty what truly happened. This is a story about a crime that defied every expectation and left a community haunted by unanswered questions. The case unfolded in a part of the United Kingdom that rarely made headlines. It was a place defined by routine and predictability. Morning commutes, evening walks, ordinary lives lived without the shadow of fear. Violence wasn't something people here worried about. It was something that happened somewhere else, to someone else, until one day, it wasn't. It was here, and it was unavoidable. The victim was known, but not well known. A familiar face in the neighborhood, but not a remarkable one. Just another person blending into the fabric of everyday life. They weren't involved in crime. They weren't wealthy or powerful, and crucially, they weren't known to have any enemies. To those who were closest to them, the idea that someone would want to harm them, let alone kill them, made no sense at all. It was simply unthinkable, In the days leading up to the crime, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There were no reported arguments, no threats, no warning signs whatsoever. The victim followed their normal routine. They went to work, they ran errands, they made plans for the future. They spoke to friends and family, just like any other day. No one could have possibly realized that these would be their final conversations. Life was proceeding as it always had, right up until the moment it stopped. When the body was discovered, the shock was immediate and profound. The location was unexpected, yet strangely familiar. It wasn't a dark alley or a remote, hidden spot. This was a place that suggested the victim hadn't been taken by force. It suggested a level of trust, or at the very least, a complete lack of fear. It was as if they had willingly gone to meet their killer, unaware of the danger they were in. From the very beginning, investigators knew this would not be a simple case. Police quickly secured the area and began the meticulous process of gathering evidence. But the crime scene offered very little clarity. In fact, it did the opposite. There were no clear signs of a struggle. There was no obvious weapon left behind. There was no clear path showing how the killer had arrived or how they had escaped. It was as if they had materialized out of thin air and then vanished, just as mysteriously. Forensic evidence did exist, but it answered nothing. Instead, it only raised more questions. DNA, fibers, and other trace elements were found, but they either led nowhere or pointed in so many different directions that they became useless. Each piece of the puzzle seemed to fit with several others, but never into one single coherent picture. The physical evidence was a labyrinth of contradictions. Detectives began the grueling task of speaking to everyone connected to the victim. People they lived near. People they worked with. People they trusted as friends and family. The interviews generated a mountain of information, but no solid leads. Some accounts conflicted with others. Details were vague. A few stories changed subtly over time as people were re-interviewed. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could prove was a lie. Just enough inconsistency to plant seeds of doubt and concern. Several individuals soon became persons of interest. On paper, each one seemed like a plausible suspect, but just as quickly, each one seemed incredibly unlikely. Some had a potential motive, but a rock-solid alibi. Others had a window of opportunity, but absolutely no reason to commit such a crime. And some had neither. Every promising lead that detectives pursued ended the same way in a frustrating dead end without a shred of concrete proof. As weeks turned into months, the pressure mounted. The public, now gripped by fear and suspicion, wanted answers. The family, trapped in a nightmare of grief, desperately wanted justice. But the investigation had stalled. Evidence that should have been decisive proved to be inconclusive. Witness memories, once thought to be reliable, became blurred and unreliable with the passage of time. Timelines that were once clear began to warp and shift. The truth, whatever it was slipping further and further away. The case began to change the community in subtle but significant ways. People became more cautious. Doors were locked earlier. Strangers were viewed with suspicion. The easygoing trust that had once defined the town eroded quietly. Every unfamiliar sound in the night felt suspicious. Every strange car on the street caused a flicker of alarm. Rumors began to spread like wildfire. Theories, ranging from the logical to the outlandish, were formed over cups of coffee and whispered in pubs. Some blamed outsiders, convinced that a stranger had brought this darkness into their town. Others suspected it was someone closer, someone they all knew, an idea that was almost too terrifying to admit. But rumors and theories do not solve murders. Sailing deep in the mystery, eventually the active investigation slowed to a crawl. Resources had to be redirected to new, more pressing cases. The murder that had once dominated the headlines was quietly labeled a cold case. No arrest was ever made. No charges were ever filed. There was no resolution. As for the police, it was a professional failure. As for the community, it was a wound that never fully healed. As for the victim's family, time did nothing to ease their pain. Without answers, their grief remained raw and unfinished. They were left with a void, filled only with questions that no one could answer, and a justice system that had reached its limits. How do you move on when you don't know why your loved one was taken? How do you find peace when their killer is still out there, living their life? Today, years later, the case remains officially unsolved. The files are still open, but they gather dust. Somewhere, the truth exists. Someone out there knows what happened that day. Someone knows why. Perhaps it's a secret they've carried for years, a heavy burden on their conscience. Or perhaps they feel nothing at all. But until that truth is spoken, until that secret is revealed, this murder remains what it has always been, a life taken too soon. A mystery preserved in time and a deafening silence that refuses to break. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing for more investigations into the unknown. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.